Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, doesn't spring up overnight. So that means that recovering from complex PTSD requires your commitment. While you're on the road to wellness, knowledge of the complex PTSD recovery stages can help keep your therapy from going in circles. It's terrible to acknowledge, but often there are years of abuse and years of trauma involved. Emotional and physical scars probably make up a significant part of your history. Still, you are a survivor, and there are solutions available for CPTSD recovery. These stages of trauma recovery are a kind of healing roadmap, and clients tell me that just having such a plan can provide them reassurance and clarity, and that makes a big difference to them. Where once you experience nightmares, flashbacks, constant anxiety, there is a proven path toward feeling calmer and more in control and even more comfortable in your own body. So let's talk about the complex PTSD recovery stages, which will provide you a roadmap. We'll explore how recovering from complex PTSD is possible. Although there's some variation in the treatment of complex trauma, generally, there are some widely agreed upon stages of complex PTSD recovery. So, what's the first stage? The first stage is usually referred to as creating safety and stabilization for CPTSD recovery. Now, one of the key issues with CPTSD is your need and maybe your craving for security. The first step in recovering from complex PTSD is the safety and stabilization phase. This includes both physical safety and emotional safety. See, you can't even begin to recover from CPTSD until you feel protected. So, a good trauma therapist is going to help you develop a deep felt sense of calmness and stability. And a good trauma therapist is also going to help you learn skills that support that. For a significant period of your life, it's probable that a sense of safety was really not present. So it's pretty likely that your nervous system has an overactive kind of a habit of being in fight, flight, or freeze response. In fact, one of the hallmarks of trauma is that it leaves your nervous system chronically dysregulated. And if you suffer from CPTSD, then what happens is relationships become triggers. Because therapy involves relating to another person deeply, it's usually a trigger too. But when you learn how to help your body feel and recognize safety, you can then learn how to have your needs met. Over time, you can begin to increasingly feel steady and you can increasingly support yourself. Yes, we all need food, water, shelter, etc. But we also need to know that we're not going to be hurt or punished for expressing our thoughts and feelings. Physical, mental, and emotional support are vital for every single one of us. So do bear in mind that at any other stages in the stages of healing, you might need to come back to the safety and stabilization phase. Now let's talk about the second stage, where you practice remembrance and mourning. Skipping this stage of trauma therapy is something important that happens. It's something that interferes with recovering from complex PTSD. In fact, I would say that many trauma survivors never recover because they don't do this stage of the work. This stage involves the resolution or the reconsolidation of old memories. And without this work, your brain can't move forward. Many survivors only have one coping tool, and that's avoidance. It's this very avoidance that keeps the trauma symptoms from resolving. Now, avoidance can be an excellent short term coping mechanism. It's something that we all use. But over the long run, it's avoidance that keeps your pain, fear, anger, and shame swirling within your body and your mind. Many wrongly believe that the only way to move forward with their lives is by not thinking about and not feeling what happened to them. And what these people don't know is that a good trauma therapist gently guides you through this remembrance and mourning stage and makes sure that this process is not overwhelming for you. In fact, the key to successful trauma therapy is reprocessing and reconsolidating old memories and doing that in a comfortable enough way. The step of remembrance and mourning the trauma is essential for recovering from complex PTSD. In this second step of the complex PTSD recovery stages, you're actively engaged in trauma recovery work. This is the heart of what's considered trauma therapy, in that you're meeting with your therapist and you're working through what happened to you. There are several options available to do this safely and productively. For example, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, often called EMDR, neurofeedback therapy, internal family systems therapy. In fact, there are hosts of trauma processing therapies. Now, the mourning aspect that we've been talking about is much like mourning a loved one that you've lost. You're mourning all the things you've lost due to your trauma. And it's the process of fully mourning your past, which lets you come fully into your present. Also, do keep in mind that if you're starting to feel unsafe, then it's time to revisit the safety and stabilization step. And once you're in a better place, you can continue with the remembrance and the mourning. Now let's talk about stage 3. I call that recovering from complex PTSD with reconnection and integration. With reconnection and integration, you can establish safety and stabilization as well as practice remembrance and mourning. And essentially now, it's time to look ahead as you consider who you are without the cloud of trauma hanging overhead. In this way, this process at this stage is all about redefining and rediscovering who you really are. Learning to turn towards another person for closeness, for comfort, and for pleasure is an important and daunting step for many trauma survivors. So many trauma survivors have shared with me that they find emotional and sexual intimacy to be overwhelmingly complicated. And that leads them to practice avoidance as a way to feel stable and a way to feel safe. Now, if you exit a life of avoidance, dissociation, and numbing, it can feel like you're tiptoeing through a minefield of shame, fear, and anger. But you can make it out. Instead of feeling powerless and perpetually victimized, you can find a new voice. Oftentimes, CPTSD gives rise to a sense of purpose through service to others. Giving back helps any kind of recovery work. In the end, this step is all about forward thinking, not dwelling in the past any longer. Now, finally, seek therapy to support recovering from CPTSD. The field of trauma treatment has come far since 1988. That's the year Judith Herman, PhD of Harvard, coined the term complex PTSD. Since then, we've learned quite a lot about how trauma impacts our brains and our nervous systems. And we've also learned how to help people along the path of recovering from complex PTSD. As you can see, these three key stages of healing CPTSD require the assistance of a trained complex PTS therapist, a specialist who understands trauma and its after effects. Your therapist does more than just analyze what happened to you. He or she will also walk with you through your recovery journey and allow you the space to become safe and whole once again. A therapist empowers you to look back on those terrible moments with less fear, less shame, and with a greater sense of purpose and forward movement. Perhaps you endured complex PTSD symptoms for years. Recovering from complex PTSD takes time, but you needn't suffer aimlessly and you needn't suffer alone. The intention of CPTSD recovery is not to draw out the process. Rather, it's to intentionally engage in the stages of healing so that you can take back your life. If you want to learn more about trauma therapy, recovering from trauma, and dealing with different symptoms of CPTSD, please visit my website. It's www.michaelgquirk.com. And if I can help you, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll find a time to talk. Thank you so much.